start with a little discussion that I've been thinking about lately. I think that, well, not lately. I've been thinking about this ever since I played A Link to the Past in parallel with A Link Between Worlds.
That's a good game. Those are
are two amazing games. For me, one more than the other, but that's beyond the point.
Yeah.
What's the point? Oh yeah, hand holding, and that's the topic I wanted to talk about hand holding in video games and how much that line that we draw at some point in the past where we stopped having tutorials and started guiding the player all the way through the game, which is for me at least it takes away a little bit of the fun for it. So yeah, I want to start with you. I want to see if you have maybe some anecdote, maybe some memory, maybe some thing specific to that relates to hand holding in video games, and your thoughts in general about how we've come from a much darker, harder time and era in video games, and how it contrasts with today's way of doing tutorials and helping the player and all that. So what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts about this?
When I think about hand holding, I think I immediately think about one game that I think was very, very much hurt by hand holding was Skyward Sword.
Right, yeah,
that's
absolutely.
The game that was absolutely damaged and hurt by this trend, this unfortunate trend in gaming. A lot of open world games like Assassin's Creed games are also hurt, in my opinion, by hand holding. And on one side, I do understand why hand holding has become a thing, because developers are just too afraid of people getting frustrated and getting lost, and then just selling the game back to the store and getting another game. Because before, games were difficult because the developers wanted to extend the lifetime of a game. They wanted people to spend more time in a game, and it worked because there wasn't as big of an offer of games back then. Now we have titles being launched on PSN, Xbox Live, or the eShop and Steam and everywhere. We have dozens of titles almost daily, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't like a game, you can just go and jump onto another game. And developers are so afraid of that. And also, people usually complain a lot about games being so expensive and season pass and whatever. Keep in mind that just by adjusting to inflation, a lot of economic stuff, right? Games have ever been as cheap as they are today. Games are so cheap today when compared back then. So it's easier for you to just go into another game if you are not having a good time with the game that you are currently playing. So developers are just too afraid of this, and this is hurting, in my opinion, a lot of the experiences that could be tailored for people like us.
Yeah.
People that grew up playing A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, which are games that are very challenging, games that do not guide you as much. So I think it's a very difficult balance. It's a difficult thing to pull off, and it's easier to just put a tutorial and explain everything than to actually teach gamers just by game design. Yeah, and that's a very difficult thing to pull off. Super Mario Bros. On the NES is the best example of that, right? That without any text, it taught you everything that you need to know about the game in its first level. Yeah, and it's I get your point. I get you. It's a difficult thing. I like that games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Fury and I like that there is a market, and there's a growing market of games that are moving away from hand-holding and going back into what made games so wonderful and so adventurous back then. Because right now, I don't feel like I really go much into adventure with modern games. I think I feel more like if I'm going into a museum, into a guided tour.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of being in a big grand adventure. So, but I like that some games are going back to that. To that trend. That's something that I think is very, very, very cool, very exciting, and I do like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree in a lot of ways with that. I do understand that, not just because it has a lot to do with what you mentioned that, previously in the past era, in the very early days of not early days of gaming, but the early days of modern gaming, right? With, Super Mario Bros. For the NES, with the original Zelda, with, games like that you bought a game. The
original Zelda.
And the original Zelda, it's amazingly punishing. It's a game it's unforgiving.
Yeah.
And that was cool. That's amazing. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, back in the day, back on that that era, you bought a game and you stuck with that game because that's all you were gonna get for a while, right?
For a while, yeah.
And so you were forced, by this external restraints and constraints. Yeah. To beat the game the way the game is.
Yeah.
And there was no internet to complain about it. There was no, collective player base to rant with. There was just the game and you, and that's about it. And that's part of the magic that's been lost. That's for one part. And the other part, it's games have become so much more than just games per se. A game as by definition just something that's there to amuse you and that you have interaction with. Games are now so much more, they delve so much more in narrative and plot lines and stories and other things that deviate from the game core essence itself.
They are a more complete art form right now.
Absolutely, yeah. And I get that because of that change in the essence of how gaming works nowadays. It can no longer be a Super Mario Bros. Where you learn how to jump, learn how to move, and learn how to stomp on Goombas, and that's about it, right? And you get everything from that. You now need to know that the character has a context, how this character interacts with other players and NPCs within that game. You need to interact with things, with places. You need to come back to get there's a lot of new things and additions that require some help, and absolutely I get that. Problem is that and going back to my example with A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, when I started playing A Link Between, they're both great games, don't get me wrong, I love both of them, and I really enjoyed myself a lot with both, but because of circumstances of the universe, I ended up playing them both at the same time. At the moment, unknowingly unaware that they were based on the same, right? A Link Between Worlds is pretty much a retelling, or it's actually kind of a sequel.
It's a direct sequel, same map, same.
But yeah, exactly. It's the same space, the same geographic allocation of everything, and I wasn't aware of that until I started playing them, and then it became obvious, right?
Yeah.
And also the mechanic of the dark world on one side, the painting or whatever world on the other, and all that, and all the places were in the same place. You get the point. And I started playing them, and I was able, and it gave me the opportunity to contrast them directly, not just by memory, by actual, by sight, right? By seeing them and seeing how similar they were. And I remember getting so infuriating when I realized, and I always use this example with you, and I always tell you the same. I don't know if I've said this before in the show, actually. There was this one point where I reached... what's the it's the dead mountain, the death mountain of A Link to the Past, which is called it's something else, not the Death Mountain. It's the something. It has a very cool song. I can't remember the name of the thing. It's basically the Death Mountain, and when you get there in A Link to the Past, you could go in and it's gonna be punishing as hell because it's not a zone.
It's Death Mountain.
Is Death Mountain really?
Yeah.
Okay, then it was the song that has a different name and something. I don't know. It was a great song. That's beyond the point. When I got there, I went in A Link to the Past, and it was intensely punishing.
Turtle Rock, maybe?
No, it's something like Rococo Hills or something like that. I'll remember mid-show probably, and or I'm gonna look it up actually. But yeah, I mean, I could go in and I would realize by how punishing it was that I probably was not ready for that zone, right? And I mean, at some point they were gonna block my way by level mechanic, and then I would have understood that I cannot yet go in here, not just because I'm getting killed every 2 seconds, but because I cannot jump a ledge or something. The same place I went on A Link to the Past, and I realized that they've put some little rocks around the entrance so that you were not able to go in. And that got me thinking, like, okay, I mean, why don't you let me discover that? Why don't you let me...
A Link Between Worlds, you mean?
Yeah.
You said A Link to the Past.
So no, I mean, I went in both.
Okay.
The rocks were on A Link Between Worlds.
Okay.
Yeah, in A Link to the Past, I wasn't able to go... I was able to go in, but I got killed all the time. And if I managed by some, random...
Miracle.
Miracle to get past all the, enemies and stuff, I would be stopped for, because of something, right?
An item or something.
Yeah, but that's very much into the Death Mountain. And in A Link Between Worlds, I was stopped immediately because the game didn't want me to go there yet.
Okay.
And I'm like, I mean, why don't you let me discover that, right? Why don't you let me go into the world and find everything by myself, right? And that's very akin to what the original Zelda did, where you can just walk around the map freely and then you could then discover and see and try out things. And no, this in A Link Between Worlds, and that's not the only instance. That's the one that really pops out for me. But there were a lot of things that, someone told me where to go. Someone told me what to do next. Someone told me, and you have to go here and then here and then here. Whereas the original A Link to the Past was much more free in how you approach the different temples, in how you discover the Dark World, in how you beat the bosses and whatnot. So, I mean, I don't see why a game like A Link Between Worlds, which is very reminiscent of A Link to the Past, needed to follow the rest of the industry in this, in this helping gone wrong, helping went beyond helping. And I don't know, I do think that even though I understand it's needed for some games, I don't think every game requires people telling you what to do, or a tutorial telling you what to do, or a sword telling you what to do, Skyward Sword. Developers nowadays, because of this trend, tend to believe that the player is dumb, that the player is not able to understand these concepts. And sadly enough, some players are even beginning to have it themselves.
It's true in a way. I mean, a big portion of players do not want to get lost in games,
right?
Because they've been taught by games, and they've grown up to be to know that games, if you get lost in a game, it's because the game is bad. It's because it's badly designed. Yeah. And then I'm getting to play. I'm gonna play Call of Duty. Gonna play something else, right? And it's devs being afraid of that, and that's a shame. But I love that games like Dark Souls, like Bloodborne, like games like this, are teaching developers that no, there is a community of people that want this kind of experience. And to be fair with Nintendo, it seems that they are learning that, because if what we've seen of the new Zelda, Breath of the Wild, is true, it seems that game is kind of going back to this openness of the first Zelda, with no guides, right? And if that's the case, awesome.
I'm all for it.
I'm all for it. Same as you, really. But yeah, I get your point. I absolutely get your rant, and I agree. It's a shame. It's a shame that we saw this trend with many games that didn't need this trend. Skyward Sword is a game that really is a game that I really think about when I think of hand holding. How badly it was hurt by its hand holding. It's the game always told me where to go, and that goes against the Zelda principle of adventure and discovery. I always knew what to do and where to go. And that's I remember there was a point where you had to find Zelda's there were some collectibles, so some hidden stuff in the world where you had to use like a sensor, and you pointed the sword towards the screen, and you went into first person view. I remember what item that was, but it was so obvious. I mean, you were like beep 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 beep. There it is. Right, and that was. I mean, just let me discover it. Let me
absolutely.
Let me get lost in the world and search the entire world and just find them. Yeah. That was Jim.
And I mean, I it sounds like I'm very against Nintendo. Not so. I love Nintendo. I love Nintendo games, and I'm really this strong with this argument against Nintendo because they have some of the best experiences without hand-holding.
Yeah.
Things like even recent things, well, relatively recent things, or 15-year-old things. Metroid Prime is one of the great examples where, at the end of the game, you have to, not spoilers, right? A 15-year-old game. You have to recover a couple of things, a couple of artifacts. Yeah. And some of them where
they don't give you a clue.
Yeah, they don't give you they give you sort of like a little hint.
Sort of, but it's so vague.
Yes, exactly. It's extremely vague, and you have to go out there and discover the things. And I remember this one artifact that was like outside of the map. The map itself didn't cover the area where the artifact was, and you needed to shoot some tower in the distance, and that tower will fall near to you, and the artifact will be revealed. That was so cool. That was so great, and the satisfaction that you got.
That was drifts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the first time you encountered the jetpack. Pirates.
I remember that one.
Yes, and the satisfaction that you get from discovering that yourself, it's beyond compare, and that's something that this hand-holding trend, it's almost getting rid of, and that's what I don't like. That's what I want with the new generation of games. Giving us that. Maybe not all games, obviously, but giving us games that start to embrace, like hopefully Breath of the Wild is the prime example for this, hopefully in the future. Games that allow us to rediscover, right? They allow us to go out there and see things and find things, and not make it dull, not make you hate the game for it, but making you understand. You mentioned Fury the other day.
Yeah.
And you said that every mistake made you, you knew that every mistake or every time you die, it was because of you, not because of the game. And that's an amazing
where
thing.
You made the mistake.
Yeah.
And the game didn't, the game on the first boss fight, which is a tutorial, it teaches you how to shoot, how to dash, how to hit with the sword, and that's it, right? It teaches you this basic movements and mechanics, but then every single boss, it doesn't tell you how to beat them.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you how to, it doesn't give you a single clue about that boss weakness or its time span where you can attack. It forces you to just learn by trial and error. And that's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome because you do learn how to play the game just by its game design. And that is something that many developers are afraid of, really. And that's awful.
Yeah, hopefully, exactly. Hopefully we can see more of that, right? More of Furies out there, more of openness and rediscovery in games.
The Witcher is a game that even though it guides you in the quest and it tells you where to go in a quest, I love that during the fights there's isn't the freaking sword or a fly or anything telling you, hey, look, it's weak, but whatever. It doesn't tell you anything like that fly. It doesn't tell you anything of that sort. So you gotta look at the monster and, well, it sort of looks like a vampire.
Yeah.
Maybe, and you have to open your bestiary and see if it's really a vampire or not. Maybe it is in there, maybe it is not. So you have to learn.
Yeah.
The game forces you in a way to learn the different categories of monsters, and you learn to identify them just by the looks, what type of monster it may be. So then you learn maybe this oil is effective against it, and that's cool. That's very, very cool. And also, it doesn't teach you really how to use your signs.
Yeah,
you have to learn and upgrade them, and then experiment and try. Maybe now that I can shoot a continuous flame, maybe it works with this guy, and you do it, and it doesn't do shit, right? So then, oh my god! So then
you have to rethink the strategy.
Yeah, so let me roll back and use Quen and maybe try Yarden and see if the monster gets trapped inside. It doesn't work either. I'm screwed, right? Yeah. It does a great job of this, and that's something that I like when a game pulls off that way. Yeah,
and it's successful at it. Yeah. I agree entirely. I agree. And hopefully we can see more of this in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's Zelda, the new Zelda could be the big one.
I hope so, man. I really hope so.
Open world, not hand holding material.
I do.
Could be. Let's hope.